Welcome back. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry and his counterpart in Russia, Sergei Lavrov, both met with delegates from Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan and Qatar in the Swiss city of Lausanne to discuss the possibility of a new ceasefire in Syria. That meeting lasted more than 4 hours, but there was no deal and no agreement. And before then, Mr. Kerry and Lavrov had met privately, discussing emerging ideas and filled both with hope that it might be possible to shape some different approaches from the meeting.
The leaders arrived for the meeting in the Swiss city of Lausanne, hopeful they'd be leaving closer to reaching a new deal that would last longer than before. But it seemed the outcome had been seen before the meeting began. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry said he had no special expectations for the meetings, and a top State Department official said he foresaw no major announcements at the end of the day. Delegates came from countries in the Middle East, with none from Europe. These countries are thought to be powerful backers of the Syrian government and rebels. Pressure is rising for halts to a ferocious 3-week-old Syrian government offensive to capture the rebel-held eastern city of Aleppo, where the United Nations says 275,000 civilians still live, and 8,000 rebels are holding out against Syrian, Russian and Iranian-backed forces. On Friday, new video emerged showing the aftermath of airstrikes in Aleppo. Rescuers were seen carrying a child out of a building in the Al-Khartaji neighborhood. Later, a man appears in a balcony carrying a child who was passed on to waiting rescuers down a ladder and away from the site. Syria's biggest city, once peaceful and beautiful before the war, has been divided into areas controlled by the government and rebels since the uprising against the Assad regime. In another amateur video, is seen the aftermath of airstrikes that left dozens of people dead. Heavy bombardment of eastern Aleppo has resumed after a brief pause, which the Syrian army said was designed to allow civilians leave. But by Sunday, Syrian rebels said they'd captured the village of Dabqib from Islamic State fighters, forcing them to retreat from a stronghold where they'd promised to fight a final apocalyptic battle with the West. The rebels, backed by Turkish tanks and warplanes, also took neighboring Soran. Speaking earlier in the week, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad said taking Aleppo from rebel forces would be a springboard for the Syrian army to push the terrorists back to Turkey.
You cannot cut, you have to clean. You have to keep cleaning this area and to push the terrorists to Turkey, to go back to where they come from, or to kill them. There's no other options. So, but Aleppo is going to be very important springboard to do this move.
The Syrian army is backed by the Russian Air Force, Iran's Revolutionary Guards and an array of Shiite militia from Arab neighbors, while Sunni rebels seeking to oust him are backed by Turkey, the United States and Gulf monarchies. Back to the meeting in Lausanne. After more than 4 hours of discussions, Mr. John Kerry said the talks had a good consensus on a number of possibilities that could lead to a ceasefire in Syria. The Russian Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, who had said he had no special expectations for the meeting, later told Russian news agencies that the countries had agreed to continued contacts in the near future aimed at ending the Syrian crisis. He said the parties had discussed several interesting ideas but did not elaborate. Western powers have accused Russia and Syria of committing atrocities by bombing hospitals, killing civilians, and preventing medical evacuations, as well as targeting an aid convoy with the loss of around 20 lives. Both governments have countered the accusations, saying they have been targeting only militants in Aleppo. Russia also accuses the U.S. of breaking the ceasefire by bombing scores of Syrian troops fighting the Islamic insurgency, though the U.S. has expressed regret over the incident.
And here are other discussions going on in diplomatic circles. British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, who campaigned for Britain to leave the European Union ahead of the referendum in June this year, has told reporters he did write an unpublished article setting out the argument for remaining in the Union. In a newspaper column, Mr. Johnson said he had wrestled with his decision over whether to back leave or remain.
So I wrote a kind of semi-parodic article in the opposite sense, which has mysteriously found its way into the paper this morning, because I think I might have sent it to a friend. But I set them side by side, and it was blindingly obvious what the right thing to do was. And I think the people made the right decision. They voted very substantially to leave the European Union, and that is what we're going to do, and we're going to make a great success of it.
The report said his Remain column argued that Britain should be intimately engaged with the EU, warned of an economic shock if it left, and suggested British financial contributions to the EU were a small price to pay for single market access. These points all contradict arguments that Johnson made time and again on the campaign trail and has continued to make since being elevated to the cabinet. Meanwhile, Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon says it is highly likely that Scotland would hold a new independence referendum before 2020, following the Brexit.
I think it's highly likely, given the situation we're in. I said that actually the morning after the EU referendum, and nothing has changed my mind. If anything, what's happened since then has probably made me think that even more so than I did the morning after the referendum. Now, that's not to say that I am not absolutely serious about trying to explore all of these other options. I am. But we have to see the Prime Minister be serious about listening to those other options.
Scotland voted a large margin to remain in the European Union, while overall Britain voted to leave in a referendum that has reignited talk of a split between Scotland and the rest of the UK. Scots rejected independence 2 years ago. UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has visited hurricane-struck Haiti. During his visit, he visited a school housing hurricane victims in Lekki and promised to help them and urged them to stay strong.
We are going to mobilize as much as resources and medical support to, first of all, prevent and stop this cholera epidemic. And then, second, support the families.
Flooding has triggered a new wave of cholera infections. The storm also disrupted power, communications, and transport links. Essential relief, such as roofing, food, and medicines, has been slow to reach many areas, prompting locals to blockade roads to try to stop passing trucks and, in some cases, looting, something Mr. Ban condemned during his visit. But he applauded the government of interim President Jocelyn Prévert for delaying the first round of presidential election, originally slated for October 9th. The election repeats a first-round vote a year ago. The results were scrapped as widely fraudulent after the second-place finisher denounced. Finally, 2 American prisoners held captive by Yemeni rebels have been released and taken to Oman after officials there mediated their release. The news was confirmed by U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry on the sidelines of a meeting in Syria in the Swiss city of Lausanne. He said the United States was discussing a ceasefire in Yemen with Saudi officials. He suggested that he may have more to say later about ending the violence between Iran-backed Houthis and the Yemeni government, which is supported by Gulf states. Oman State Television broadcast footage of the 2 Americans disembarking from a plane belonging to the Royal Air Force of Oman. It reported that Yemenis wounded in the civil war in Yemen were also flown for treatment on the same plane. We've come to the end of the program, but let us know your thoughts on the discussions using any of our addresses showing on your screen. I am Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.